The restoration bench collapsed with a deafening crash. Serafina Lang lay pinned beneath the wreckage, her right hand trapped under the jagged steel beam, blood seeping through her fingers and pooling on the scattered muslin. Pain came in slow, grinding waves, like a dull blade sawing methodically through bone. Beyond the workshop walls, applause thundered through the exhibition hall. Vivian Lang was on stage, wearing the crane in clouds. The gown Serafina had spent 7 months sewing by hand. The pale yellow silk organza drifted like mist under the spotlights, the hand-embroidered crane at the collar poised for flight. It was the last piece she had designed for her mother's studio. Now Vivian lifted the hem as she ascended the podium, tears glistening perfectly on her lashes. "I'm so grateful for the jury's recognition." Vivian's voice trembled with practiced emotion. "This gown represents countless sleepless nights. I want to dedicate it to my sister." Serafina clenched her jaw and stretched her left hand toward the shears that had clattered to the floor. Her fingertips had just grazed the cold metal when a leather shoe pressed down on her knuckles. "Don't move." Lucas Ashford's voice came from above, smooth as ever, as if he were murmuring a lover's endearment. He crouched down, his face arranged into an expression of tender concern, and ground his heel into her hand. His eyes held nothing but cold contempt. "Serafina, you've disappointed me. How could you be so sloppy about something like plagiarism?" "I didn't plagiarize." She stared up at him. "That gown is what? What proof do you have?" Lucas smiled. "The sketches have Vivian's signature. The fabric orders are in her handwriting. Even your own studio assistant can testify that you were merely assisting Vivian with the design." Serafina's pupils contracted. She remembered Vivian visiting the studio with Soup, wanting to see her sister's sketches. Lucas offering to organize her copyright filings, taking all her original documents. Her assistant's hesitant glances. They had started this long before she ever suspected. "Oh, and your father is on his way. He'll be announcing to the press that all of the Sue by Brand's design copyrights belong to Vivian now, including the studio your mother left you." "He wouldn't dare." Serafina thrashed against the beam, driving the steel deeper into her flesh. "That studio is my mother's. It was your mother's. But you've been blacklisted from the industry, haven't you?" Lucas's tone was gentle, as if he were explaining something to a difficult child. "A designer with a lifetime ban can't exactly inherit a studio, can she?" Every light in the exhibition hall went dark. 3 seconds later, a single spotlight illuminated the massive screen above the stage. The footage that began to play was time-stamped, grainy but unmistakable. Vivian Lang entering the studio alone late at night, removing a stack of sketches from the safe, photographing each page with her phone, then inserting a USB drive into Serafina's computer. The date was 3 days before Serafina submitted her final designs. The audience erupted. Vivian's face drained of all color under the stage lights. The screen kept playing. A new clip, an audio recording. That fabric shipment came through a special channel. "Just relabel the composition tags as 100% mulberry silk. I've already taken care of the inspection." The voice belonged to Richard Lang. Chaos swept through the hall. Serafina felt the pressure on her hand finally release. She wrenched her right arm free. The entire hand had swollen grotesquely, her ring finger bent at an angle no living joint should permit. She picked up the shears with her left hand and forced herself upright. The spotlight swung abruptly, pinning her in its glare. Everyone saw her now, the designer accused of plagiarism, her right hand dripping blood, the white muslin beneath her stained a visceral red. "Security! Get her out of here!" Vivian shrieked, lunging forward, and then she stumbled. The train of her gown had been sewn to the stage floor with pale yellow silk thread, the stitches so fine and precise they were nearly invisible. Vivian pitched forward, flailing, and grabbed a nearby display rack. The entire row of garment stands came crashing down. As those so-called original designs hit the ground, their seams split open. Beneath the linings, faded ink revealed the original designer's signature stitched into every garment. Serafina Lang. A name from 3 years ago, embroidered into each piece with meticulous patience, waiting for this exact moment. Serafina walked toward the stage, the shears in her hand. Lucas moved to block her path. She sliced the air between them with a single, swift motion. "Lucas." Her voice was raw but eerily steady. "I'm not asking you to admit what you did. I'm telling you. You're going to kneel, and you're going to give back everything you stole. One piece at a time. Underscore. Rain lashed the city in sheets. The old district's alleys had flooded ankle-deep. Serafina stood under an awning outside Maggie's dry cleaning, her right hand wrapped in bandages, a faded canvas bag slung over her left shoulder. The metal shutter rattled open, revealing Maggie Zhang's round, weathered face. Good heavens, you're soaked through. Maggie yanked her inside and threw a dry towel over her head. Your hand, how is it? The pins are out. 3 months of rehab. I can move it now. Serafina flexed her right hand. The fingers bent, but only slightly. Still can't do fine work yet. Then why are you back? They're all looking for you. Your father ran a statement in the papers last week. Said he was cutting all ties with you. Serafina said nothing. She pulled a newspaper from her canvas bag. Fashion City Weekly, front page headline. Former prodigy Serafina Lang exposed for plagiarism. Sue by brand severs all relations. Successor named as half-sister Vivian Lang. The photo showed Vivian weeping delicately at a press conference. Maggie, is that shop front at the end of the alley still vacant? It's vacant, but you can't possibly. Maggie's eyes widened. You're not thinking of. I rented it. Serafina pulled a key from her bag. Sign goes up tomorrow. Alterations shop. Are you out of your mind? You're a Paris Haute Couture Week designer, and you're going to hem trousers for a living? If my mother could see her studio with Vivian's name on it now, that's what would truly break her. Serafina's voice was soft, but each word carried the chill of honed steel. Maggie, I didn't come back to admit defeat. But before I win, I need every single one of them to believe I'm finished. Maggie stared at her. The girl she had watched grow up. 3 years ago, she'd been a nervous young thing who bit her lip while fitting muslins. Now, the sharpness in her eyes was unmasked, blade bright, and impossible to hide. Serafina pulled out her laptop and opened it. The desktop was dense with files, time-stamped scans of original sketches, fabric procurement contracts, bank records, email chains, and dozens of audio files labeled with dates and names. Is all of that enough? Maggie swallowed. No. Serafina closed the laptop. I still need the accident report from the runway show 3 years ago, testimony from the cutting table supplier, and the complete transcripts from that industry association hearing. All of that is with Franklin Chow. Maggie inhaled sharply. Old Mr. Chow? Wasn't he forced into retirement? I heard his son ran up gambling debts. They sold the house to pay them off. He's living in some warehouse on the outskirts now, which is why I have to find him. But before that, Serafina stood up. I need them to see a version of me that lets them sleep at night. A Serafina Lang with a ruined right hand, a destroyed reputation, making a living doing alterations in a back alley. Underscore. Three days later, a hand-painted sign appeared above the third shop front in the alley, Serafina's Alterations. She had lettered it herself with her left hand, the characters crooked and childlike. The shop was barely 200 square feet. A cutting table took up a third of the space. The most valuable piece of equipment was a second-hand industrial sewing machine that squeaked with every stitch. Serafina sat behind the cutting table, a black brace on her right wrist, marking a piece of old wool with tailor's chalk in her left hand. Business on opening day was thinner than yesterday's porridge. Until the third afternoon, when her first real customer pushed through the door. It was Mrs. Liu from the tenement across the alley, clutching a dress that was clearly a size too small, her face arranged in a bargaining smile. You're Serafina, right? Maggie sent me. This dress, I bought it online, it's way too small. Can you let it out? Serafina took the dress and examined it. Typical fast fashion polyester. The side seams had been trimmed to less than half a centimeter of allowance. There's not enough seam allowance to let this out. Mrs. Liu's face crumpled. What do you mean you can't? The alterations counter at the mall said they could. They lied to you. These side seams have barely 3 millimeters of allowance. Letting them out would give you maybe 1 centimeter of extra circumference. You need at least 3 centimeters to fit. If I force it, the fabric will fray. It'll split after one wash. Mrs. Lu's face flushed with indignation. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in Serafina's calm, level gaze made her stop. Leave the dress. I'll alter it, but not by touching the side seams. Serafina picked up her shears and began unpicking the invisible zipper at the center back. Her right hand was visibly stiff, the scissors switching between left and right several times. Yet every movement was unervingly precise. She removed the zipper, found a remnant of similar fabric in her scrap pile, cut a long, narrow strip, folded and pressed it, and sewed it into the back seam as a concealed pleat. Once the zipper was reinstalled, the dress looked exactly the same, but the circumference had gained nearly 4 centimeters. Mrs. Lu tried it on and turned before the mirror, examining herself from every angle. Well, I'll be. Serafina, you've got real skill. How much? 20. Mrs. Lu's eyes bulged. The mall wanted 80. Within half an hour, Mrs. Lu was back with 3 of her friends, each one clutching garments that needed work, chattering as they crowded into the tiny shop. Serafina quoted each job between 15 and 30 yuan. The women were so delighted they looked ready to haul their entire wardrobes over. Serafina, with hands like yours, why aren't you working at a proper boutique? Someone asked. Serafina bent over her sewing machine. My hand was injured. Can't do fine work anymore. Alterations are all I can manage. Underscore. By dusk, Serafina had closed up and was sitting at the cutting table, counting the day's earnings. Day 3. Total revenue, 120 yuan. Enough for a week of groceries. She was about to put the money away when the light in the doorway dimmed. A man stood silhouetted against the fading sun. She couldn't make out his face. Only a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, the cufflinks glinting once in the light. Are you still open for alterations? His voice was low, with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to giving orders. He stepped inside, and the light revealed a striking face. High brow, sharp jaw, eyes that seemed unnaturally deep in the dimness. He was carrying a suit jacket. Serafina recognized the fabric instantly. Loro Piena Vicuña wool, market price starting at 3,000 euros per meter, cut in the unmistakable English tradition of a Seville row master. The armhole feels tight. Can you let it out? Serafina took the jacket and turned it inside out, examining the seam construction. The stitching was impossibly fine and even, fully hand-set sleeves. In one corner of the lining, she found a tiny embroidered mark. SL Seville row. Stephen Leong, one of the top 3 tailors on the row, with a minimum 8-month waiting list. A man who wore Stephen Leong bespoke suits had come to a back-alley alterations shop. Either he knew nothing about tailoring, or he was here for reasons that had nothing to do with the jacket. I can do it. The armhole needs to be let out by 1.5 centimeters, with a slight shoulder adjustment. The back panel will need repositioning. 3 days. 1,200 yuan. 1,200. The man smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. The alterations counter at the mall quoted me 80. The alterations counter at the mall can't touch this jacket. Stephen Liang's handset, sleeves use a reverse pick stitch. If a regular tailor unpicks them, they'll never sew it back properly. If you don't mind your armhole seams looking like centipede legs, I can do it for 80. But I don't recommend it. Silence filled the shop for several seconds. The man's expression shifted, surprise, perhaps, or the satisfaction of a private theory being confirmed. How did you know it's Stephen Liang's work? Stitch density. Serafina didn't look up. Machine-set sleeves run 5 to 6 stitches per centimeter. Standard handwork, 8 to 9. Your jacket's armhole seam runs 12 stitches per centimeter, and it's done in reverse pick stitch. Only Stephen Leong and his 2 apprentices use that technique. The man held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Do it. He laid the jacket on the cutting table and counted out 1,200 yuan notes. I'll pick it up in 3 days. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. What's your name? Serafina. Serafina. He said it as if tasting the syllables. I'm Dorian Ashford. He walked out. His silhouette dissolved into the twilight at the end of the alley. Serafina sat motionless for a long moment, then bent her head and continued marking her fabric. Though her right wrist was braced, beneath the table, her fingers were performing tiny, repetitive flexion exercises, the standard drills of nerve damage rehabilitation. Her right hand had never truly been ruined. Underscore. Word of the alteration shop spread through the old neighborhood. Most customers were longtime residents, though young women began finding their way there, drawn by reputation. Serafina turned no one away. Her prices were low, her work immaculate. Garments left her shop with seams so precise the alterations were invisible. The only oddity was that she used only her left hand. When anyone asked about her right, she would say, flatly, old injury. No strength in it. Only Maggie knew the truth. One night, bringing over a bowl of pork rib soup, she found Serafina at the cutting table, a black rubber rehabilitation grip in her right hand, working through repetitions. Sweat beaded at her temples. How much function have you actually recovered? Serafina set down the grip. From her pincushion, she drew the finest needle she owned, a size 12 hand-sewing needle, and threaded it with a single motion, right hand guiding the needle, left hand feeding the thread. The entire sequence took less than a second. I can sew, but it's still not fully stable. I can manage about 2 hours of fine work a day. After that, the tremor sets in. Maggie, I need to find someone. Franklin Chow. He was the vice chairman of the Industry Association 3 years ago. Do you know where he is now? Maggie's expression flickered. That warehouse on the edge of town, I know it. It used to be our factory's old storage. Be careful if you go there. That whole area is junkyards now. The roads are bad. The next morning, Serafina hung a closed for the day sign and took a 2-hour bus to the city's industrial fringe. Rows of half-demolished factories. Mountains of scrap. She picked her way through an alley littered with broken glass and stopped before a row of rusted tin warehouses. On the door of the last unit, someone had scrawled 2 words in chalk. Chow Residence. She knocked 3 times before dragging footsteps sounded inside. The door opened a crack, revealing a gaunt, hollowed face. Franklin Chow had aged beyond recognition. His hair gone completely white, his eyes sunken deep in their sockets, his cheekbones jutting sharply. He wore an old shirt washed so many times its original color was lost. Professor Chow, I'm Serafina Lang. His hand clenched around the doorframe. He stared at her for 10 full seconds, then took a step back as if he'd been struck. You're alive. Alive. 3 years. I've been overseas doing rehabilitation. I came back last month. The warehouse was crammed with old clothes and fabric, the air thick with mildew. A camp bed had been set up in one corner. The only piece of real furniture was an old wooden desk covered with newspapers, all of them about her plagiarism scandal, 3 years old. You came for those documents. Chow lowered himself into the desk chair and gestured toward a wooden stool. I did keep a backup. Serafina's heart stuttered. But his next word landed like ice water. Someone took them. 3 months ago. I was out that night. When I came back, the door had been forced. Nothing else was taken, only that folder. Whoever did it was a professional. They knew exactly what they were after. Serafina's left hand curled into a fist. 3 years of planning. The most critical link in her evidence chain, gone. Professor Chow, how much of what was in that file do you still remember? Every page. For the first time, a light flickered in those clouded old eyes. He rose and walked to a metal cabinet in the corner, rummaged for a moment, and pulled out a notebook. Over the years, I was afraid my memory would fail me. So I reconstructed everything I could remember. But my recollections alone won't hold up in court. To file a lawsuit, you need the originals. Serafina opened the notebook. Chow's handwriting was precise and strong. Every page was labeled with dates, events, and the people involved, followed by detailed analysis and conclusions. Her gaze stopped at the final chapter. Cutting table collapse investigation, not an accident, deliberately caused. Professor Chow, who supplied that cutting table? Chow flipped through several pages and pointed to a name. An equipment trading company under the Ashford Group. The procurement contract was handled by Lucas Ashford's secretary, a woman named Julia Roth. Serafina's pupils contracted. 3 years ago, Lucas had gifted her that cutting table, claiming he'd had it specially ordered from Germany. She'd been so touched her eyes had welled up. Now she remembered, from the very first day of installation, something had been off about it. The foot pedal would occasionally jam. The safety catch never felt quite right. She had mentioned it to Lucas twice. He kept promising to send a technician. No one ever came. Julia Roth, where is she now? Resigned 2 years ago. Went back to her hometown, I think. Opened a small clothing shop somewhere in the northern provinces. I don't have the exact address, but I still have her old phone number. Serafina photographed the number with her phone, then stood and bowed deeply. Professor Chow, thank you. Your dissenting vote at that hearing. It was the single biggest reason I kept going for 3 years. Chow turned his face away, his shoulders trembling. Don't say that. Your mother was kind to me. Half of what I know about pattern making, I learned from her. And I couldn't even protect her daughter. You did protect me. Serafina tucked the notebook into her bag. You protected the most important thing, the truth. She withdrew an envelope and placed it on the desk. This isn't charity. Professor Chow, I've engaged a lawyer for you, someone who specializes in debt disputes. He'll contact you next week. And when I've taken back everything that was stolen, I want you to come work with me. Subai needs a real pattern maker. There's no one else I trust. Chow stared at her. 2 tears finally slipped from those clouded old eyes. His lips moved, but in the end he only nodded, hard. When Serafina stepped out of the warehouse, a light rain had begun to fall. Her phone screen lit up with a message from Jasper Yen, her operations director. The Stellar Capital acquisition has passed due diligence. Ashford Group's OEM factory contracts in the accessible luxury segment expire next month. All 3 factories' renewal letters of intent have been redirected to us. Also, the Federation de la Haute Couture has responded. Your new collection, submitted under the Thorn identity, has passed preliminary review. She deleted the thread and quickened her pace through the puddles, leaving the ruined industrial zone behind. Underscore. Dorian Ashford returned 3 days later, as promised. He had changed into a navy linen suit. He slipped on the altered jacket and turned before the mirror, checking the fit from both angles. The armhole tension was perfect. The shoulder point lay against his frame as if it had grown there. The entire back line flowed so smoothly the alteration was undetectable. Excellent. Better than Stephen's original fit. Serafina sat behind the cutting table, sewing a frog button onto a vintage cheapao, and didn't look up. 3,200. I paid 1,200 already. That was for the armhole. The shoulder adjustment and back panel repositioning were additional. 2,000 extra. Serafina finally raised her eyes. Cash or card? Dorian blinked, then laughed. When he laughed, the cold austerity of his face softened. There was something almost boyish in it. He counted out another 2,000 in cash without a flicker of displeasure. Serafina, have you ever considered taking on other work? Not alterations. Design. My hand is ruined. I can't design anymore. Your left hand is more skilled than most people's too. Besides, the 3 adjustments you just made aren't something an ordinary alterations tailor could handle. Repositioning a shoulder point requires rebalancing the entire back panel. That kind of judgment takes at least a decade of pattern-making experience. This man's eye was dangerously sharp. Serafina's fingers paused on the frog button for a single beat. I studied for a few years. Then the accident happened. My hand couldn't manage it anymore. Alterations are just a way to get by. Dorian was silent for a moment. He knew, of course, what a cutting table collapse meant for a designer who lived by her hands. It was annihilation. That's a tragedy. He said it with an uncharacteristic weight of sincerity. From inside his jacket, he withdrew a business card and placed it on the cutting table. Dark gray stock, silver lettering, starkly minimal. Dorian Ashford, Asia Pacific, Ashford Group. If you ever decide to design again, call this number. Serafina glanced at the card, then slipped it into a drawer. The drawer already held several other cards. A design director from a contemporary luxury brand, sales reps from 2 fabric suppliers, a young man who had claimed to be a talent scout. She closed the drawer and continued sewing. The garment in her hands was a vintage cheapao brought in by an elderly customer, supposedly her grandmother's wedding dress. The silk had yellowed with age. One of the collar buttons was missing, and the binding at the cuffs had worn through. Serafina had removed the entire binding and replaced it with midnight blue velvet. She had taken out all 4 frog buttons and re-knotted them from silver silk thread into a set of intricate Rui clasps. The old woman who came to collect it put on her reading glasses and examined the dress for a long time. Her eyes reddened. This is exactly how it looked. When I got married, this is exactly how it looked. Girl, your hands are gifted. Serafina charged her 50 yuan and walked her to the door. The old woman took a few steps, then turned back and looked at Serafina with sudden seriousness. Girl, a talent like yours, it's wasted in an alley like this. Serafina smiled, but said nothing. Of course she knew she was wasted here. But she needed this perception of waste, needed the world to see her degradation, her submission. She needed her enemies to believe that life had ground her down, that she had accepted her fate. Only when the prey thinks the hunter has put down the gun does it relax its guard. Only then does it expose its throat. Her phone vibrated. A message from Jasper. Julia Roth located. She's running a children's clothing shop in Lianyungang. She's willing to talk. The Fashion Week invitation has been delivered to Vivian Lang's studio. She's confirmed attendance. Serafina typed 4 words in reply. Proceed as planned. She flipped the sign to closed, pulled down the metal shutter, and walked into the back room behind the cutting table. Against the wall stood an industrial sewing machine. Beside it, a professional dress form. Shelves held bolts of fabric and tools, neatly organized. She pulled down a length of black double-faced cashmere and a roll of silver-gray silk charmeuse. Black to anchor the silver's ethereality, silver to ignite the black's depth. She didn't sketch. She never needed to. Every pattern existed fully formed in her mind. Every seam line, every dart angle, the drape of the fabric and its spatial relationship to the body, it all assembled itself in her head with architectural precision. She draped the fabric directly onto the form and began marking with tailor's chalk. Her left hand guided the chalk. Her right stabilized the fabric. Every motion was efficient, exact. The shears sliced through the fabric with a crisp, fine sound. Under score. Across the city, in the Ashford family villa, the lights blazed. Vivian Lang sat at the vanity in her walk-in closet on the 2nd floor, smoothing serum over her face. Her phone was on speaker. Lucas's voice crackled through, thick with irritation. I've told you 100 times, stop using those designs of unknown provenance. That Crane and Cloud series nearly got flagged as Serafina's work. If I hadn't moved fast to bury it, you'd be trending for all the wrong reasons right now. What's there to be afraid of? Vivian pressed her lips together. She's been broken for 3 years. What wave could she possibly make? Those sketches, I took them from her studio. Even if she crawled out of whatever hole she's in and claimed them, who would believe her? She's blacklisted. You'd better not underestimate her. Lucas's voice went cold. 3 years ago, that trap was airtight, and she still got away. 3 years of absolute silence. Doesn't that strike you as strange? A woman with a ruined hand who can't even work a sewing machine. What could she possibly do? I had someone check last month. No design firm in the entire city has a record of hiring her. No one in the fabric markets has even seen her. Don't screw up the Fashion Week gala next week. My mother is already pressing about the wedding date. Lucas was quiet for a moment. It had better be fine. We'll finalize things after the gala. He hung up. Vivian set down her brush and walked to the garment rack. The Crane and Clouds, the gown she had taken from Serafina's studio, hung at the very back. The pale yellow silk organza glowed softly under the lights. She had worn it only once. The night, everything changed. She had never worn it again. She could barely stand to look at it. But she couldn't bring herself to throw it away, either. Every time she saw it, she remembered what Lucas had told her. Vivian, you're smarter than your sister. Smart people know when to seize an opportunity. She had seized it. She had seized everything. The brand, the studio, the design copyrights, the fiancé, and their father's favor. All of it. She had earned it. Underscore. A week later, the Asia Fashion Week Gala was held at the International Convention Center in the heart of the city. The red carpet had been laid since 4 in the afternoon. 6 live-feed cameras were positioned along it. Vivian Lang arrived in a champagne off-the-shoulder gown of her own design, the skirt encrusted with hand-sewn crystal beads. Lucas Ashford escorted her, impeccable in a white tuxedo. At the end of the red carpet, Madeleine Ashford stood waiting in an ink-green cheapao, regal and remote. The look she gave Vivian was one of pure maternal approval. "Vivian, you look stunning tonight. This gown is your own design, isn't it? Our Lucas is a lucky man." Vivian ducked her head with a practiced, modest smile. "You're too kind. It's time you started calling me mother." Madeleine patted her hand, her smile layered with meaning. Outside the convention center, in the small plaza to the south, an unremarkable corner had been claimed by an old treadle sewing machine, a folding table, and a folding chair. Beside the table stood a hand-lettered sign, "Serafina's Alterations. Evening wear, all types." While you wait. Serafina sat in the folding chair, dressed in a simple black cheapao of her own making. The design so restrained it was almost severe, yet every seam curved precisely to the body. The black brace was on her right wrist. A tailor's tape measure hung around her neck. She looked exactly like every other small-time seamstress who set up shop near convention centers to catch last-minute emergencies. Unremarkable, nearly invisible. A young woman in an evening gown came sprinting over, clutching a sapphire blue dress with a burst side seam. "Can you fix this? I caught my heel on the hem getting out of the car. The whole seam ripped." Serafina examined the dress. "Yes, 10 minutes." The treadle machine clattered to life, its rhythmic creaking echoing across the plaza. 8 minutes later, the dress was done. The resewn side seam was so precise it was indistinguishable from the original construction. 50. That cheap. The young woman paid in seconds and dashed toward the restroom, clutching the dress. Dusk deepened. The red carpet spectacle was nearing its finale. Then, a black Maybach pulled up at the VIP entrance. The door opened, and an elderly man in a black Zhongshan suit stepped out. He was perhaps 70, his hair completely white, but his posture was ramrod straight. He had the ascetic presence of a scholar. The photographers stationed at the entrance froze for one collective beat, then raised their cameras as if electrocuted. "Good God, that's Sebastian Shun." Sebastian Shun, lifetime honorary member of the Fédération Internationale de la Haute Couture, China's first-generation haute couture designer, the first Chinese judge in the history of Paris Haute Couture Week. His work had been collected by the Centre Pompidou. He stood at the absolute apex of the global fashion pyramid. This titan, who had long since retreated from public life, had materialized at a regional Fashion Week gala. It was unthinkable. Shen seemed oblivious to the commotion around him. He strode directly toward the entrance. Several organizers came sprinting out to receive him, bowing and scraping. Shen shook their hands without expression. He was about to enter the convention center, then stopped. His gaze had landed on the treadle sewing machine in the corner of the plaza, more precisely, on the young woman sitting behind it. He stared at her for several seconds. Then he walked, briskly, purposefully, to that corner, to that folding table. He bent down, and in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, said, "Maestro Thorn, what on earth are you doing here?" Serafina looked up. A faint smile touched her lips. "Professor Shen, you've mistaken me for someone else. I'm just a seamstress. Do you think I'm senile?" Shen straightened up. His voice rang out like a struck bell. 3 years ago, you did that Nirvana collection in Paris. 7 pieces. Every single one was museum caliber. I was in the audience. After your show, I told the man next to me, "This Thorn, she comes once in 50 years." He pointed at the brace on her right hand. "You wore a veil when you took your bow, but I know your hands. I know those cutting hands. I would never mistake them." The air around them seemed to solidify. The photographers stood paralyzed. That Thorn, the Thorn who never made public appearances, whose identity was unknown even to the Federation, the most mysterious legendary designer in global haute couture, was here, doing street alterations? Serafina sighed and rose to her feet. "Professor Shun, why do this? I'm just here trying to make a living." "Make a living?" Shen threw his head back and laughed. "Huh. The youngest guest member in the history of the Fédération Internationale, making a living doing street alterations? Thorn, this gambit of yours is more brilliant than any gown you've ever designed." The first to react was a fashion media reporter. She practically lunged at Serafina, her voice recorder trembling in her hand. Is it true? You're really Thorn? The Thorn who won the Golden Thimble at Paris Haute Couture Week 3 seasons in a row. Serafina didn't answer. She bent her head and packed up her tools. Shin answered for her. Of course it's true. I've spent 50 years in this industry. When have I ever misidentified anyone? He turned back to Serafina, his voice abruptly grave. Maestro Thorn, this year's Paris Haute Couture Week. Will you be there? I've been recommending your work to the Federation for 3 years. Serafina closed her tool case and met Shun's earnest gaze. She nodded once. Yes, this year. I'll go. Shin clapped her shoulder with satisfaction, turned, and strode into the convention center, leaving a cluster of shell-shocked journalists in his wake. Serafina picked up her case and folding table and headed toward the parking lot. Her phone buzzed. Jasper. The Thorn reveal happened ahead of schedule. Do you need PR intervention? She typed back one-handed. No. If it's early, it's early. Just adds fuel to tonight's fire. She opened Weibo. The trending charts had detonated. Hashtag Sebastian Shinspot's Thorn on Street had rocketed to the top spot, tagged with a deep red, explosive label. Comments were pouring in by the thousands per second. Wait, the legendary designer Thorn is a street seamstress. Hold on. This woman looks exactly like that designer who was exposed for plagiarism 3 years ago, Serafina Lang? Oh my God, if it really is the same person, then was the plagiarism case 3 years ago a setup? Serafina closed the app and started the engine. In her rearview mirror, the convention center blazed with lights. Inside the third-floor ballroom, Vivian Lang still knew nothing. She was making small talk with fashion magazine editors, a champagne flute in her hand. Then Madeleine Ashford's assistant hurried over and whispered in her ear. The hand holding Madeleine's wineglass tightened convulsively. She took the iPad the assistant offered and scrolled through the trending topics. Her face grew darker with every swipe. Serafina Lang. She bit out the syllables, each one ground between her teeth. She's been hiding right under our noses this whole time. The assistant murmured. Madam, shall I inform Mr. Ashford and Miss Lang? Not yet. Madeleine handed back the iPad. Her smile had already reassembled itself. Let them enjoy their evening. Tomorrow morning, I want a full report on every move Serafina Lang has made for the past 3 years. Where she went, who she saw, what she did, every detail. I want to know everything. She stood in the shadows, watching through the crowd as Vivian clinked glasses and laughed. Her gaze was a serpent coiled in the dark. 3 years ago, she had destroyed Serafina Lang. She could do it again. This time, she would make certain there were no loose ends. Underscore. The hashtag burned for 3 days. Public opinion split cleanly down the middle. Serafina sat in the alterations shop, pressing a client's skirt while reviewing the sentiment report Jasper had compiled. Jasper himself sat across from her on a tiny stool, laptop balanced on his knees, fingers flying across the keyboard. Current social media support for you is at 63%. Neutral, 28. Opposition, 9. Mostly Vivian's diehard fans claiming you're impersonating Thorn for clout. Are you ready for the next move? Ready. Jasper pulled up a file. The National Designers Summit. Next Wednesday, at the International Conference Center. Vivian, as last year's gold medalist, is giving the keynote address. Live media coverage. Industry experts doing on-site commentary. But security is tight. Vivian's team has vetted every attendee. Your name is definitely on their block list. Serafina set down the iron. From a drawer, she withdrew a deep blue invitation and laid it on the cutting table. It was a special guest commentator pass for the summit, seat number 001. How did you get that? Jasper's pupils contracted. The Fédération de la Haute Couture gets 3 special commentator seats every year. They allocated one of this year's to Thorn. The invitation arrived last week. It was sent by the summit committee chairman himself. Jasper was silent for 2 beats, then let out a quiet laugh. He had worked with Dorian Ashford for years and seen plenty of master strategists. But Serafina's ability to play a 3-year game, every move meticulously planned, every detail nailed down, still left him in awe. 3 years ago, she had been stripped of everything. Everyone thought she was finished. What no one knew was that she had been building from the shadows, rehabilitating her right hand, accumulating international prestige as Thorn, quietly acquiring the core OEM factories in Ashford Group's accessible luxury division through stellar capital. Every step had seemed unrelated to the others. In reality, they formed a perfect noose. Does Dorian know your Thorn? No, but he's probably guessed at least 70%. Dorian's instincts about people are rarely wrong. Jasper closed his laptop. By the way, he asked me to tell you. He'll be at the summit too. He's the opening keynote speaker, invited by the organizers. He'd actually declined all public appearances this year, but yesterday he suddenly told them he'd come. I didn't ask why. Serafina said nothing. The pressure on the iron, however, increased perceptibly. Jasper stood, tactfully taking his leave. At the door, he glanced back. Serafina, Dorian may be cold on the surface, but deep down, he's fiercely protective of the people he's chosen. Once he decides to help someone, no one can stop him. I didn't ask for his help. That's exactly why it's so remarkable. Jasper smiled and walked out. Serafina turned and walked into the back room. On the dress form, the black cashmere and silver charmeuse gown was nearly complete. The silhouette was a reinvented cheap-how cut. From the waist down, the silver-gray silk cascaded like liquid mercury, pooling at the hem in a shimmer of captured light. The neckline was an asymmetric single lapel, the left side folded from the silver fabric into a half-open camellia. At the flower's heart, a teardrop moonstone caught the light. The gown needed only one final step, hand-finished binding. Serafina slipped on a thimble, picked up her finest needle, a size 9, and began stitching along the neckline's curve. Her right hand was steady tonight. Each stitch sank into the fabric with uniform depth and spacing. Outside the window, the locust tree blossoms were falling. In this forgotten alley, in this crumbling shop, the woman the world believed was finished was putting the final stitches into a gown that would stun an entire industry. Underscore. Underscore. 20 minutes before the National Designers Summit opened, the 1,000-seat auditorium at the International Conference Center was already packed. Vivian Lang sat in the dead center of the front row, wearing a dusty pink suit of her own design. Her makeup was impeccable. Her expression was calm, poised, gently confident. 3 rows behind her, in a corner seat, Serafina sat quietly in a nondescript navy shirt dress, her right wrist in its usual brace. She looked like any other unremarkable industry newcomer. No one noticed her. At 9 o'clock sharp, the summit began. The first agenda item, opening remarks by Dorian Ashford, CEO of Ashford Group Asia Pacific and core judge for all 4 major international fashion weeks. Dorian rose from the front row and walked onto the stage. He was dressed in a smoke-gray 3-piece suit, the tailoring so sharp it looked poured onto him. He adjusted the microphone. His voice, when he spoke, was cool and incisive. Good morning. Today's theme is the boundaries of design. But before we discuss boundaries, I want to address another subject, bottom lines. In this industry, the core competitive advantage has never been hype. It's never been traffic. It's never been capital maneuvering. It's originality, honesty, reverence for craft. When an industry begins to tolerate plagiarists on its podiums, when true creators are forced out, then the question of boundaries no longer matters. Because the industry has already lost its bottom line. The room was so silent you could hear dust settling. Vivian's smile had frozen on her face. Dorian continued. That is why I'm announcing today that Ashford Group Asia Pacific, beginning this quarter, will establish a dedicated fund to support independent designers in defending their original work. The initial commitment is $5 million. A rustle of murmurs swept the room. Vivian's fingers tightened around her speech notes, her knuckles going white. In the corner of Serafina's mouth curved involuntarily. The keynote concluded, and the host announced the main event. Last year's gold medalist Vivian Lang would share her creative process, followed by expert commentary. Vivian rose and glided onto the stage, spotlights tracking her. The giant screen behind her lit up with her bio and portfolio. Distinguished judges, esteemed colleagues, today I want to share the creative journey behind my gold medal series, Eastern Imagery. The screen began cycling through sketches and finished pieces. The work was undeniably beautiful. Traditional Eastern motifs fused with modern cuts, the negative space poetry of inkwash painting, the crackle-glazed textures of celadon, the borrowed view compositions of classical gardens. Vivian spoke with theatrical passion, sprinkling her narrative with tales of sleepless nights and countless revisions. Young designers in the audience nodded along, visibly moved. She concluded with her showcase piece, a set of 4 gowns, the crown jewel of the Eastern Imagery series, the work that had clinched her gold medal. This collection is called 4 Seasons, each gown themed around a flower: spring orchid, summer lotus, autumn chrysanthemum, winter plum. I created these during the most difficult period of my life. My sister, as many of you know, left the industry for personal reasons. As her younger sister, I was devastated. She lowered her head. When she lifted it again, her eyes were artfully red. I didn't know if I could keep designing. I didn't know if I had the right to inherit what my sister once held. But eventually I understood. The only thing I could do was prove through my work that I hadn't betrayed this brand, that I hadn't betrayed everyone's expectations. Warm applause filled the room. Serafina sat motionless in her corner, fingertips tapping a soft, slow rhythm on the armrest. The first commentator was the vice chairman of the Designers Association, an elderly gentleman who spent a full 5 minutes lavishing praise on Vivian. The second was a Paris-based haute couture designer named Jean-Pierre, whose tone was noticeably more perfunctory than the first. The host was about to move to the next segment when Dorian Ashford raised his hand. The room fell silent. Monsieur Jean-Pierre was very gracious just now, but I noticed he left one sentence unfinished. He said the cutting technique in the 4 Seasons series seemed somewhat familiar. Could you elaborate? Jean-Pierre hesitated, then took the microphone. I only meant that the skirt treatment on the summer lotus gown, in particular, the reverse fold structure inside the hem, bears a very strong resemblance to the work of an old friend of mine. In the current haute couture landscape, as far as I know, there is only one person capable of executing that technique with such precision. And who is that? Thorn. The auditorium detonated. Vivian's face went bloodless. This is a misunderstanding. That summer lotus gown is entirely my own design. I have complete sketches and records of the creative process. Who said anything about plagiarism? A voice rose from the back of the hall, cool, quiet, yet impossibly clear through the din. Serafina Lang stood up and undid the top button of her shirt dress. The navy garment slid from her shoulders, revealing what lay beneath: the black cashmere and silver charmeuse gown, the reinvented cheapao with its asymmetric camellia lapel, the teardrop moonstone throwing arcs of cold blue light. Every gaze in the room snapped to her. Serafina descended the steps, her heels striking the marble floor in an unhurried rhythm. Each step landed like a heartbeat. Vivian, your 4 Seasons collection, 4 gowns, corresponding to 4 pieces I first conceived 6 years ago. Spring orchid is my orchid in the empty valley. Summer lotus is my moonlit lotus pond. Autumn chrysanthemum and winter plum are my eastern fence and fragrance in darkness. The original sketches for all 4 pieces bear my signature and dated watermarks. You're lying. Where's your proof? Serafina drew a craft paper envelope from her clutch and laid out a thick sheaf of original sketches across the judging table. The paper was slightly yellowed with age, but the handwritten signature in the bottom right corner of each page, Serafina Lang, and the corresponding dates were unmistakable under the camera's close-up lenses. That's not all. She pulled out a bound document. This traces every meter of fabric used in those gowns, from procurement sources to supplier release records to international shipping manifests, all the way to their entry into Vivian's studio. The silk organza used in Summer Lotus came from a 30-year-old intangible cultural heritage atelier in Hangzhou. Last March, I personally ordered 12 meters under my own name. I have the order records. That same fabric appeared in Vivian's work in June. Miss Lang, where, exactly, did you acquire it? Vivian's lips moved soundlessly. No words came. Serafina withdrew a black USB drive. This contains every electronic design file from Vivian's studio for the past 3 years, creation timestamps, modification logs, original creator metadata. The creation dates of these files on Vivian's computer are all later than my original records. And the residual creator account information embedded in the file properties still traces back to my studio system. She set the USB drive down gently on the judging table. I am formally requesting that the Industry Association reopen its review of every competition entry Vivian Lang has submitted in the past 3 years. Should plagiarism be confirmed, I request the revocation of all her awards and full legal pursuit of copyright infringement liability. Vivian staggered. She turned to Lucas, her eyes screaming for rescue. Lucas stood. His face was ashen. He strode onto the stage and positioned himself in front of Vivian like a shield. There are numerous irregularities here. Serafina Lang was placed on the industry's permanent blacklist 3 years ago. Whether the so-called evidence she has presented meets procedural standards will require formal review before any. That won't be necessary. Dorian Ashford's voice cut through, cold and absolute. He rose, phone in hand. The Fédération de la Haute Couture has just issued a statement. They have verified Thorn's identity. Thorn is Serafina Lang. The Federation has also formally accepted Serafina's complaint against Vivian Lang for suspected transnational copyright infringement. An investigation will commence immediately. During the investigation, all of Vivian Lang's registrations with the Federation are suspended. Her work will be removed from all past exhibitions and publications. If the investigation confirms infringement, she faces a lifetime ban from the industry. Vivian's legs finally gave out. She slid to the stage floor, the tasteful, dusty pink suit crumpling around her like a used rag. Lucas reached down to pull her up, his face iron gray, but Dorian's next words nailed him in place. Mr. Ashford, when your Ashford Group acquired the Sue by brand last year, was there significant omission in your due diligence? If the core design assets of the Sue by brand are subject to copyright dispute, under the warranty clauses of your acquisition agreement, as the responsible party, you know better than I what liabilities you now face. Lucas's face went dark. He stared at Dorian, then wrenched his gaze to the woman in the black and silver gown standing below the stage. His expression churned with something almost unreadable: shock, fury, fear, and a thread of disbelief he couldn't quite suppress. He could not fathom it. The woman he had ground beneath his heel 3 years ago now stood before him not only intact, but holding a hand of cards so devastating that any one of them could end him. Serafina met his stare. Her face was still water, but beneath it, 3 years of frozen fire churned. Mr. Ashford. Miss Lang. Her voice was soft, so soft only the front rows could hear. This is only the beginning. Then she turned and walked up the aisle toward the exit. The black and silver gown swayed gently behind her. The moonstone at her throat threw arcs of cold light. Every person in that room watched her go. No one made a sound. Shutters clattered in her wake like a hailstorm. When Serafina pushed through the auditorium doors, a fine rain was falling. She stood under the awning at the convention center entrance, staring out at the blurred city skyline. Footsteps behind her. Dorian emerged and stood at her side, his jacket draped over his arm. Your dress today, it closes left over right. Serafina glanced at him. Not many people understood the significance of a left-closing garment. In tradition, it carried a very specific meaning: reversal, overturning fate, turning the world upside down. Deliberate, she said. I know. Dorian paused. That's why I didn't offer you my jacket. A woman who wears her gown left over right doesn't need a man's coat to keep her warm. Underscore. In the 10 days following the summit, public opinion detonated completely. Under overwhelming pressure, the Industry Association announced the reopening of its investigation into the plagiarism charges against Serafina Lang. The comment sections of every social media account linked to Vivian's studio were overrun. Brand partnerships collapsed one after another. Richard Lang was cornered by reporters outside his office and could barely stammer out a sentence before security guards had to physically extract him. Ashford Group's stock price slid 12% in 5 trading days. And Serafina's black and silver left-closing cheapao gown became the subject of obsessive analysis across the fashion internet. Bloggers wrote essays of 10,000 words or more dissecting every seam. The alterations shop exploded overnight. Lines formed before dawn, stretching from the alley mouth to its far end. Serafina endured 3 days of this. On the 4th day, she taped a notice to the door. Alterations by appointment only. Maximum 10 orders per day. No interviews. No in-store photography. Violators blacklisted. Lifetime ban. The lines thinned considerably after that. But the real work was happening elsewhere. Serafina sat in her back room, facing a video conference screen split into 3 windows. Her Federation contact in Paris, her fabric supplier, and the legal team from Stellar Capital. Thorn, you're confirmed for this year's Haute Couture Week. The Paris contact, a French woman in her 40s, looked ready to vibrate through the screen. Confirmed. The new collection is already in progress. 9 pieces total, 3 toiles completed so far. But I want the finale slot. That requires a 2/3 vote from the Federation jury. I already have 6 votes. And I need a global live broadcast on the day of the show. The Frenchwoman's eyes widened. Thorn, you're not planning to do something dramatic, are you? Serafina didn't answer. She closed the conference and opened another folder. Franklin Chow's reconstructed investigation report, along with all the supplementary material Jasper had gathered. Julia Roth had agreed to testify and had provided internal emails from Lucas's secretarial team regarding the cutting table procurement. The emails contained phrases like, safety features can be retrofitted later, and cost considerations. Cancel the original German safety catches. Combined with Chow's investigation into the sample switching, the restored surveillance footage from the runway show accident, and the procedural violation evidence from the original industry hearing. The chain of proof was now a closed loop. Still not enough. Serafina opened a 3rd folder, labeled Ashford Group. Inside was 6 months of comprehensive infiltration of Ashford's accessible luxury division by Stellar Capital. All 3 core OEM factories had redirected their renewal letters of intent to Stellar. Half the fabric supply chain had been quietly locked down. Lucas Ashford still had no idea that the impregnable supply chain he boasted about daily had already changed hands. It only needed the right moment. The next morning, Serafina changed into a sharp black suit, picked up a crocodile leather handbag, and walked out of the alley. Maggie stood in the doorway of her dry cleaning shop and watched her climb into a black Rolls-Royce, the car Dorian had sent. Miss Lang, Mr. Ashford asked me to take you to the peninsula. Today's Haute Couture Fabric Salon is there. He said he'll meet you at the venue. The peninsula's 3rd-floor ballroom had been transformed into a couture fabric showroom. Over 20 of the world's most elite fabric suppliers had brought their latest collections, accessible only to invited industry professionals. Vivian was there. She stood in front of a French lace atelier's display, dressed in a cream knit dress. A small entourage from her studio clustered around her. But a closer look revealed the strain. Her smile was held together by effort. The lines of exhaustion at her eyes and temples could not be hidden. Since the summit, she had lost 3 brand partnerships. 2 of her studio's key designers had quit. Even her personal assistant had submitted a resignation letter. She was here today to maintain the appearance that everything was normal, and, with luck, to sign 1 or 2 fabric suppliers to keep herself afloat. When Serafina walked into the salon, the hostess at the door glanced at her invitation and went through a full emotional journey in under a second, from professional smile to naked shock. The name on the invitation was Thorn. The title was Chief Tasting Officer. Serafina pressed a finger to her lips. The hostess blinked, then nodded vigorously. Serafina made an unhurried circuit of the room, pausing occasionally to feel a fabric, murmuring a few words in fluent French or Japanese to the exhibitors. Several foreign suppliers nodded along with visible respect. At the display of a century-old Italian worsted mill, she stopped. On the rack was a bolt of charcoal gray, superfine merino wool. The label read, Super 200s. 100% Australian merino. Yarn count 200. A cluster of 7 or 8 industry veterans were gathered around it, murmuring in admiration. The exhibitor, an elderly Italian, was nodding with pride. This fabric is currently limited to less than 300 meters worldwide. 200 count superfine wool demands extraordinary spinning precision. There are fewer than 5 mills on Earth capable of producing it consistently. Vivian pushed to the front and ran her hand over the fabric, producing a practiced gasp. The hand is absolutely exquisite. A gown made from this would be stunning. She turned to her assistant, raising her voice. Note this down. This will be the signature fabric for our studio's next collection. Ask if they can reserve 30 meters for us. Her assistant hesitated. Miss Lang, this fabric is priced at 12,000 euros per meter. 30 meters would be 360,000 euros. So what? Quality has no price. Several nearby designers exchanged meaningful glances. The elderly Italian smiled politely and was about to speak, when a cool voice came from behind the crowd. This fabric isn't suitable for gowns. Vivian's hand froze on the bolt. She turned. Serafina stood at the back of the group, black suit, sharp as a drawn blade. What are you doing here? This is an invitation-only professional salon. You are blacklisted. Miss Lang. The Italian abruptly interrupted her. His expression had transformed from polite professionalism to genuine delight. You're here at last. Did you receive the fabric samples I sent last month? That silk organza was custom-produced for your new collection. The artisans at the mill are all eager to see the finished pieces. Silence swept the group. Vivian stood paralyzed, her face cycling from red to white to green. I did. Serafina stepped past the frozen Vivian and approached the display rack, rubbing the edge of the Super 200's wool between her fingers. I ran shrinkage and color fastness tests on the samples. Results were excellent. It's usable. She paused, then looked at the Italian. But this batch of Super 200's, Johnny, you haven't been entirely honest with everyone, have you? The old Italian's smile flickered. Serafina picked up the fabric tag and flipped it over, pointing at a line of minuscule Italian text. This batch indeed achieved a 200 count, but the twist setting is too high. That compromises the drape. For gowns, especially anything with a full trailing skirt, it'll read as stiff. More importantly, this batch experienced a minor fault during warping. There are yin-xing, tao-xing tse, striped defects invisible to the naked eye, but they'll show under side light. Johnny opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he shook his head with a rueful laugh. Thorn, you're terrifying. Our internal team is still compiling the report on this batch, and you spotted it at a glance. He turned to the assembled crowd and spread his hands. Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies. Miss Thorn is entirely correct. This Super 200's wool is still in the experimental stage. We're some distance from true commercial production. The crowd erupted in murmurs. A purchasing director from a major domestic menswear brand inhaled sharply. My God. She identified a problem that wasn't even on the label, purely by hand feel and visual inspection. Beside him, a veteran fabric merchant pushed up his glasses and murmured, the drape problem with Super 200's wool is inherently controversial. Very few people in this industry are qualified to make a definitive judgment. She not only judged it, she precisely identified the twist and warping faults. That kind of eye comes from at least a decade of hands-on experience. Vivian's face had gone from green to a sickly gray. Serafina paused beside her as she passed. Vivian, you can't even read fabric, and you stand here talking about your next collection's signature material? I suggest you start with the fundamentals of warp and weft density and yarn twist theory before you attempt design. Otherwise, that 360,000 euros worth of fabric you were about to buy would have produced nothing but scrap. Vivian shook from head to foot. The fabric swatch in her hand was crumpled into a ball. She wanted to scream, to fight back, to deploy tears and frailty the way she always had, and win sympathy. But every gaze in that room was telling her a single, brutal truth. In this salon, the real master was not her. It was the woman she had spent 3 years keeping crushed beneath her heel. Underscore. Halfway through the salon, Serafina's phone rang. She stepped outside to take the call. Jasper's voice was tight with urgency. Serafina, we have a problem. Vivian's studio just published a long post claiming you publicly humiliated her at the salon, with an edited video clip attached. The top trending topic right now is Thorn bullies half-sister in public. The comments section is a war zone. Serafina opened Weibo and scanned it. Vivian's studio had written a piece of masterful emotional manipulation. My sister told me to get out of the industry in front of everyone. I was publicly humiliated at the salon until I was shaking. For 3 years I waited for my sister to come back. What I got instead was even deeper cruelty. The attached video had been surgically edited to show only the line, "You can't even read fabric," with all surrounding context removed. The top comments were almost universally sympathetic to Vivian. Serafina's expression did not shift. She walked back into the salon, took her seat, and sipped her now-cold black tea. Several exhibitors and designers nearby threw her concerned glances. Someone murmured, "Miss Thorn, we saw the trending topic. Do you need us to speak out for you?" "Not yet." Serafina set down her teacup. Let her enjoy herself for a bit. She pulled out her phone and sent Jasper a message. Release the full video. Not just today's salon footage. Release the full summit video alongside it. Also, have Julia Roth stand ready. She takes the stage at the hearing in 3 days. Less than 10 minutes after the message was sent, a new topic shot up the trending charts. Full video leaked. Who's really bullying whom? The complete footage was the salon's own surveillance recording. Unedited, unmuted, showing the entire sequence from Vivian's entrance to her exit. The comments section winds shifted instantly. By the time the salon concluded, Johnny personally walked Serafina to the door, clasping her hand. "Thorn, you must use our silk organza for your new collection this year. I've saved you the very best batch." Serafina smiled. "Johnny, I'll take half your organza. But the other half, I'm also using natural indigo-dyed denim from the Japanese mill. Contrast kinji, patchwork contrast. Denim and silk organza, together?" Johnny's eyes flew wide. Then he smacked his own forehead. "Good Lord, you're going to set the finale on fire." Serafina climbed into the black Rolls-Royce. Dorian was already in the back seat, reviewing a document. "Thank you for the full video today," Serafina said, fastening her seatbelt. "I didn't release it. The salon's head of security released it himself. He said he couldn't stand watching someone invert the truth. How are the hearing preparations?" "The evidence chain is closed. Julia Roth has agreed to testify. The cutting table procurement emails are all secured. I also have Franklin Chow's original investigation report. He had a copy in the cellar of his family's old house. Jasper retrieved it in person last week." "Then what's still missing?" Serafina was silent for several seconds. "A final push. Lucas Ashford is the type who will never confess unless every escape route is blocked. He'll exhaust every avenue to deflect blame, to dump everything on his subordinates. To make him face justice, I have to strip him of every last exit in open court." Dorian studied her for a long moment before speaking. "The Ashford Group Board has a special meeting next week. The agenda item is the replacement of the accessible luxury division head. Lucas's significant due diligence failures in the sue by acquisition exposed Ashford Group to joint liability for copyright infringement. That alone is sufficient grounds for a no-confidence vote." "How do you know the internal agenda of the Ashford Group Board?" "Because Ashford Group holds 7.3% of Ashford Group shares." Dorian said it the way one might comment on the weather. "Not much, but enough to table a motion at a special board meeting." Serafina let out a soft laugh. "Dorian, are you helping me?" "No, I'm helping the industry clean up its garbage." Underscore. "3 days later, the Industry Association hearing convened as scheduled. The hearing room held about 100 people. At the front sat the 7-member hearing panel. To the left, the petitioner's seat. To the right, the respondent's seat. 3 rows of observers filled the back. Industry representatives, journalists, legal observers, and members of the public selected through an open lottery. The proceedings were streamed live. The online reservation count had passed 8 million before the session even began. Serafina sat in the petitioner's seat, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, her hair pulled back into a severe low ponytail. She looked clean and lethal, like an unsheathed blade. The brace was still on her right wrist. Today, it was not a concealment. It was a declaration. For people occupied the respondents' seats: Vivian Lang, Lucas Ashford, Madeleine Ashford, and Richard Lang. Vivian's eyes were red-rimmed. She had clearly been crying before arriving. Lucas was expressionless, his lips pressed into a bloodless line. Madeleine appeared utterly composed, sitting erect, a string of Buddhist prayer beads in her hand. Richard Lang kept his head down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The hearing chair was the association's newly appointed legal counsel, a woman in her 50s with gold-rimmed glasses, precise and efficient. The subject of this hearing is the re-examination of the legality of the original hearing procedures and the authenticity of the evidence regarding the multiple charges brought against designer Serafina Lang 3 years ago, including plagiarism, industry fraud, and the substitution of inferior materials. The petitioner may now make an opening statement. Serafina stood and switched on her microphone. 3 years ago, I was accused of plagiarizing an overseas designer, defrauding clients with substandard materials, and stealing core brand assets. These 3 charges led to my permanent blacklisting from the industry, the loss of the studio my mother left me and all my design copyrights, the loss of basic function in my right hand, the loss of my reputation, and the loss of my engagement. Today, I will prove 3 things. First, all of these charges were based on fabricated evidence and false testimony. Second, the conspiracy against me was orchestrated by Madeleine Ashford, executed by Lucas Ashford and Vivian Lang, with the knowledge and cooperation of Richard Lang. Third, in the course of this conspiracy, they caused the cutting table collapse with intent to inflict grievous bodily harm, and subsequently bribed hearing panel members to obstruct justice. Do you have evidence? Madeleine's lawyer was on his feet, aggressive. The case 3 years ago underwent a legally valid hearing process. To overturn it now, you must present new, substantive evidence sufficient to invalidate the original ruling. I do. Serafina drew a bound document from her file envelope. This is the first set of evidence, the refutation of the plagiarism charge. She opened the first page and held up a scanned original sketch. This is my original design. The bottom right corner bears my signature and a dated watermark. The date is June 12th, 4 years ago, a full 8 months before the so-called plagiarized overseas work was published. She turned to the second page and held up an email chain. These are email exchanges between myself and a judge of the Fédération de la Haute Couture. In these emails, I submitted the design concept for this same piece. The attached hand-drawn sketches are highly consistent with the final work. The timestamps have been notarized by the French National Notary Office and hold international legal validity. She turned to the third page. This is a written statement from the overseas designer I was accused of plagiarizing. He explicitly states that his work was published after my design was completed, that he never accused me of plagiarism, and that the so-called plagiarism evidence from 3 years ago was fabricated by someone using his name without authorization. This statement has also been notarized. The 3 documents were projected onto the main screen one by one. The room was utterly silent. If the hearing panel 3 years ago had seen any one of these 3 documents, they could not have ruled the plagiarism charge valid. The problem is that all 3 of these documents were deliberately concealed during that hearing. I request that the complete case file from the original hearing be retrieved to verify whether these documents were included in the evidence list. The hearing chair nodded. This panel has already retrieved the case file from 3 years ago. Upon verification, the 3 documents the petitioner has just referenced were indeed absent from the evidence list presented at that hearing. The original hearing procedure contains a significant flaw at this juncture. A swell of suppressed murmurs rose from the observer seats. The prayer beads in Madeleine Ashford's hand paused for a fraction of a second. Serafina continued, methodically presenting the evidence disproving the inferior materials charge, original supplier release orders, third-party lab composition reports, the actual procurement contracts for that fabric. Every piece had been notarized. Dates, locations, names, seals, all unmistakably clear. Then she brought out the heavy evidence regarding the industry fraud charge. At the hearing that had sealed her fate 3 years ago, of the 12 panel members, at least 4 had direct or indirect financial ties to the Ashford Group. 2 were immediate family members of Ashford executives. 1 served as a consultant for an Ashford-owned brand. The son of a 4th worked for the company. This is why, 3 years ago, 11 of the 12 panel members voted against me. Serafina's voice remained steady, but every word carried a blade's edge. Because they were not making independent judgments. They were following their employer's orders. Vivian's face had gone the color of paper. Her lawyer was flipping frantically through documents. Sweat beaded at his hairline. Next, Serafina presented the complete surveillance footage from the night of the runway show accident. This footage had been deleted from the system 3 years ago, but Franklin Chow had made a backup through technical means the very next day. The footage clearly showed Vivian entering the studio late at night, photographing sketches with her phone, and inserting a USB drive into Serafina's computer. This can't be real. Vivian finally shattered, shooting to her feet, her voice a shriek. This video is fake. AI generated. I was never in her studio. Miss Vivian Lang. The hearing chair's tone was icy. This footage has undergone authenticity verification by 3 independent forensic institutes. All 3 have confirmed it as original, unaltered recording. Your denial cannot stand against technical evidence. Vivian's legs gave way. She collapsed back into her chair. The hearing stretched for 4 full hours. Serafina presented each piece of evidence in turn, explaining each one, every document notarized and independently authenticated, every timeline cross-verified by multiple sources. As the setting sun flooded the room with orange light, she presented her final piece of evidence. This is the investigation conclusion regarding the cutting table collapse. She held up a thick forensic engineering report. The accredited Forensic Institute conducted comprehensive technical testing of that cutting table. Their conclusions: the steel support axle had been artificially worn down to less than 40% of its original diameter prior to the incident. The safety catch had been deliberately removed. The hydraulic support system had been injected with corrosive fluid. These acts of sabotage occurred within 1 week before the incident. This rules out accident. It was a premeditated act of intentional harm. This forensic report was issued by a nationally certified judicial appraisal institution. Its conclusion: this was an act of deliberate injury, not an equipment failure accident. Absolute silence. Serafina drew one more item from her envelope. This is an internal email provided by Julia Roth, who served as Mr. Lucas Ashford's secretary at the time. The email explicitly records Lucas Ashford's instructions regarding the cutting table procurement. The safety catch can be installed later. Control costs. If problems arise, we'll retrofit. Miss Roth is present today. If the panel requires, she is available to testify. Lucas shot to his feet so violently his chair toppled backward. He braced his hands on the table. His knuckles were bone white. His lips moved soundlessly. Madeleine Ashford's face finally changed. The composure that had never once cracked now showed the faintest hairline fracture of panic. The prayer beads in her hand creaked under the pressure of her grip. The hearing chair looked to the 6 panel members on either side, then struck her gavel. In light of the petitioner's evidence chain, which is complete, logically coherent, and has been independently authenticated and notarized in its entirety, this hearing issues the following preliminary rulings. 1. The original hearing procedure contains significant flaws and conflicts of interest. The verdict of 3 years ago is hereby vacated, effective immediately. All industry penalties imposed on Ms. Serafina Lang are terminated as of this moment. 2. Ms. Vivian Lang is suspected of plagiarism, evidence fabrication, and obstruction of industry justice. Her conduct constitutes a serious violation of professional standards. This body will initiate a formal investigation. During the investigation, her industry association membership and eligibility for all awards are suspended. 3. Regarding the suspected intentional harm in the cutting table collapse, all relevant evidence will be transferred to judicial authorities. The procuratorate will determine whether to file criminal charges. The gavel fell. The sound echoed through the hearing room. Heavy, final, absolute. Serafina stood. She straightened her jacket. She did not look at anyone. She picked up her document envelope and walked toward the exit. Behind her, Vivian had collapsed completely, sobbing over the table. Lucas stood frozen like a stone statue, his expression locked in some unspeakable distortion. Madeleine Ashford had closed her eyes. The string of sandalwood beads lay scattered silently across the floor. Richard Lang's face was buried in his hands, his shoulders heaving. The hearing room doors closed behind Serafina. The corridor outside was already choked with journalists. Flashbulbs turned her translucent. Microphones and voice recorders thrust toward her face from every direction. The shouted questions blurred into one roaring noise. She answered nothing. She simply carved a path through the crowd and stepped into the elevator. The door slid shut, sealing out the chaos. Serafina leaned against the elevator wall and closed her eyes. 3 years. She had waited 3 years for this moment. But the feeling in her chest wasn't the savage triumph she had imagined. It was something stranger, a deep, quiet stillness. Like a person who has run a very long race, finally slowing at the finish line. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dorian. For words, "Well done." She typed back, "Thanks." As she walked out of the hotel lobby, her phone buzzed again. Jasper had sent a document. Minutes of the Ashford Group special board meeting. Under resolutions, one line, Lucas Ashford removed from position as head of accessible luxury division. All executive authorities suspended pending further investigation. Lucas was finished. But this was not the end. Underscore The Ashford Group board resolution hit the papers the next morning. Financial Weekly's front page was brutal in its simplicity. Ashford Group accessible luxury head Lucas Ashford removed. Sue by brand acquisition faces full investigation. The news sent Ashford stock into another freefall. Market capitalization evaporated by over $2 billion in 3 days. Lucas locked himself in his private club and didn't emerge for 3 days. He sat on the leather sofa before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the coffee table buried under files and empty bottles. His tie hung loose around his neck. His hair was a disheveled mess. He looked nothing like the polished, elegant executive the world knew. The doorbell rang 3 times. Then the sound of the passcode lock disengaging. Madeleine Ashford pushed through the door, Vivian trailing behind her. Madeleine swept her gaze over the wreckage of bottles and papers, her brow furrowing into a tight knot. She walked up to Lucas and delivered a single, ringing slap across his face. Pathetic. Her voice was ice. One woman has brought you to this. You spent 3 years building this. I spent 3 years. Your father spent 3 years. And now you lie here drinking while the stock price bleeds out day after day. What else is there? Lucas lifted his head. His eyes were raw red. The board has stripped me of all authority. If Serafina's evidence actually goes to the prosecutors, I'm facing prison. So you're giving up? Madeleine lowered herself onto the sofa opposite him, a fresh string of prayer beads already in her hand. It's true that Serafina has evidence. But that evidence only covers what happened 3 years ago. What cards do we still hold? The Ashford Group is still standing. The Subai brand is still ours. Richard Lang is still on our side. And most importantly, the one thing she cares about most, she hasn't gotten back yet. Subai? That's the brand her mother left her. As long as Subai remains in our hands, she will always have a raw wound. Lucas looked up, but said nothing. Madeleine's voice softened slightly, though every word was still a concealed blade. As for you, she turned to Vivian, undisguised contempt in her tone. All those plagiarism charges, admit to all of them. Don't fight. Say you were too deeply influenced by your sister. Say you unconsciously borrowed from her work. Keep your posture low. Act remorseful. As for the things that could actually destroy us, the cutting table sabotage, the hearing collusion, you keep your mouth shut. Not a single word. But the hearing ruling has already come down. My industry credentials are suspended. What do industry credentials matter? Madeleine cut her off with savage impatience. When this storm passes, you change your name, launch a new brand, and start over. Do you think I care about your little design awards? What I care about is the Ashford family's reputation and the Ashford Group's assets. She stood, brushing creases from her skirt. Lucas, go to the office tomorrow. Submit a self-criticism report to the board. Be sincere. Do not, under any circumstances, be defiant. Leave the rest to me. At the door, she paused and looked back at Lucas, who sat motionless on the sofa. Her voice dropped, almost a murmur, as if speaking to herself. Serafina Lang. I destroyed her once 3 years ago. I can do it again. The door closed behind her. Lucas rose and walked to the window, staring out at the glittering city. His own face reflected back at him in the glass, exhausted, furious, broken, and threaded with a fear he refused to name. It wasn't the board he was afraid of. It wasn't the stock price. It wasn't even the evidence. It was Serafina's eyes, those eyes that had stared up at him from beneath the cutting table 3 years ago, filled with blood and something utterly unyielding. The killing intent in those eyes had not dimmed by a single degree in 3 years. The invitation to the charity gala arrived a month later. Gold embossed cardstock. Hosted by the Harper's Bazaar Charity Foundation. Venue: the Park Hyatt Ballroom. Theme: Haute Couture one-of-a-kind auction. Vivian had hesitated for a long time before deciding to attend. Her position was precarious, industry credentials suspended, all brand partnerships severed. But Madeleine was right. Hiding was the worst thing she could do right now. So she came. She wore a deep V evening gown of her own design in wine red velvet. Lucas did not accompany her. Madeleine did, resplendent in a sapphire blue cheapao, her smile as regal as ever as she worked the room. Serafina had not received an invitation. That did not mean she wouldn't be there. The red carpet stretched a full 50 meters from curb to entrance. When Vivian stepped onto it, a few photographers dutifully raised their cameras. She was about to deploy her signature gentle smile when a collective gasp rippled from the far end of the carpet. A black Rolls-Royce had pulled up at the entrance. The door opened. Dorian Ashford stepped out in a flawlessly fitted black tuxedo, bow tie immaculate. Then he turned, reached back into the car, and extended his hand. A slender hand settled into his palm. Serafina Lang stepped out, and the photographer's shutters detonated like gunfire. She was wearing a one-of-a-kind couture gown, the evolved version of the black and silver cheapao that had made her legend at the summit. Only one existed in the world. The camellia at the collar was no longer folded fabric. It was hand-embroidered in 3 dimensions, each petal worked in a different shade of silver thread, creating a flowing, layered luminosity under the lights. The moonstone still rested at the flower's center, casting its cold, pure light. Her right wrist still wore a brace, but tonight's brace was custom-made, black lambskin, embroidered in silver thread with a tiny briar rose insignia. Dorian escorted her up the red carpet. Vivian stood frozen halfway down, her lips quivering, her feet rooted to the spot. A staff member behind her had to prompt her twice. She snapped out of her trance and practically fled into the ballroom. The evening's centerpiece was the one-of-a-kind couture auction. The organizers had sourced a dozen collector's item haute couture gowns from around the world. Models showcased them on the runway while guests bid from their tables. The first several lots were classic reeditions from major houses. Hammer prices fell between $100,000 and $500,000. The atmosphere was politely tepid. Then the 7th lot was wheeled out. The runway lights shifted to a warm, soft gold. A model glided forward in a gown of pale, yellow silk organza. The hand-embroidered crane at the collar poised for flight. The layered tulle of the skirt drifted like morning mist. Under the lights, the gown possessed an almost unreal beauty. Serafina's fingers clenched around her wineglass. It was the crane in clouds. The gown Vivian had stolen and worn onto the podium 3 years ago. 7 months of her life's work. Her name erased from it. Another's name put in its place. And now, it was on the auction block. The host's voice rang with theatrical enthusiasm. This piece is titled The Crane in Clouds. It is the work that launched Miss Vivian Lang to fame 3 years ago, and the representative piece for which she won Best New Designer. Today, Miss Lang has generously donated this gown, so deeply meaningful to her, in support of charity. Opening bid, $50,000. 60, 80, 100,000. The bidding climbed at a measured pace. Vivian's smile deepened. She even exchanged a smug glance with Madeleine across the room. 300,000. Dorian Ashford raised his paddle. The room went silent for a beat. 300,000, first call. 300,000, second call. Wait. Serafina stood up. Every gaze in the room snapped to her. She walked unhurriedly to the edge of the runway and stood close to the gown, studying it. Her eyes traveled from the Suzhou embroidery at the collar to the layered architecture of the skirt, from the hand of the fabric to the trajectory of every seam. The way a mother might examine a child lost and found. This gown is a counterfeit. The room erupted. Vivian shot to her feet. You're lying. Serafina reached out and gently lifted the inner lining of the skirt. She pointed at a line of stitching for the entire room to see. The real crane in clouds uses a reverse blind stitch on the inner hem. Stitch density, 12 per centimeter. This imitation uses a standard running stitch, 7 stitches per centimeter. And the thread is wrong. The original uses imported Japanese silk thread. This is common polyester. You couldn't even fake it properly, and you dared put it up for auction? Vivian's face had lost every trace of color. A senior couture collector in the audience rose and approached the runway. He examined the gown's details, pulled out a loupe, and spent a long time studying the seams and fabric. Then he straightened up. His voice was heavy. The lady is entirely correct. The craftsmanship on this piece falls short of haute couture standards. The inner hem stitching is notably inferior to the original, and the hand and drape of this fabric are nothing like the genuine article. The original was custom silk organza. Its luster and drape were extraordinary. This fabric, forgive my frankness, is common, off-the-rack organza. No special treatment whatsoever. The air in the ballroom seemed to have been vacuumed out. Vivian stood trembling, her makeup blotching with cold sweat. She wanted to scream, to fight, to deploy tears the way she always had, but every word stuck in her throat. Because the gown was a fake. She had never dared auction the real one. It was the only remaining proof she had ever been a genius designer. Madeleine Ashford's face was iron. The hand holding her wineglass trembled almost imperceptibly. She merely looked at Vivian, one cold glance, and the chill in that look went straight through Vivian's spine. Serafina turned to address the assembled guests and media. Her voice had recovered its quiet, lethal clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, I have located the genuine crane in clouds through legal channels. It is in Vivian Lang's private collection room, inside her studio, hung in a climate-controlled glass case. I have already applied to the court for an evidence preservation order. It will be executed tomorrow morning. Silence. Then the shutter sounds detonated like a thunderstorm. Vivian finally collapsed. She stumbled backward, her heel catching her hem. She would have fallen if a server hadn't caught her, but the tray in his hands tipped, and champagne flutes slid to the floor, shattering in a bright, ringing cascade. Madeleine rose, expressionless, and flicked a glance at her assistant. The assistant immediately stepped forward, hooked an arm under Vivian, and half-dragged, half-carried her out of the ballroom. Serafina returned to her seat. Dorian poured her a glass of champagne. She took a sip. Her face was still water. That gown, the crane in clouds. What are you going to do with it? Take it back. Everything my mother left me. Every piece. Not one less. The auction was suspended for 20 minutes. The organizers frantically pulled the counterfeit gown and reshuffled the remaining lots. But no one's attention was on the auction anymore. Journalists were filing stories at manic speed. Photographers tracked Vivian and Madeleine's exit, firing frame after frame. The livestream chat was scrolling so fast the entire screen was a blur. The gala ended late. Serafina stood on the steps of the Park Hyatt, waiting for her car. The night wind cut through the lingering champagne and perfume. Dorian stood beside her. He took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. This time, he did not hesitate. Next month, Paris. You need a coronation. Serafina drew his jacket tighter. The fabric still held the faint scent of his cedarwood cologne. The finale slot. Global live broadcast. I've already named the new collection. It's called Nirvana. Your collection in Paris 3 years ago was called Nirvana. Yes, but this is different. 3 years ago was the phoenix burning. This time, it's the phoenix rising from the ashes. 9 gowns. Each one corresponds to a stolen design. During the global broadcast, I will present the evidence chain for each piece. The whole world will see who the real creator is and who the thief is. And they will all see that Serafina Lang is back. Underscore. One month later. Paris. The final day of Haute Couture Week. The finale slot was scheduled for 8 o'clock in the evening, under the glass dome of the Grand Palais. It was the most coveted slot of the entire week, historically reserved for houses like Chanel or Dior. This year, it had been given, unprecedentedly, to an anonymous designer. Thorn. 2 hours before the show, the plaza outside the Grand Palais was already jammed. The barricades along the red carpet groaned under the press of bodies. The guest list was the absolute apex of the fashion world, the full jury of the Fédération de la Haute Couture. Core buyers from all 4 major fashion weeks. The global editors-in-chief of every edition of Vogue, senior executives from LVMH and Kering, and multiple design titans who had long since retreated from public life. Sebastian Shin sat dead center in the front row, dressed in a black Zhongshan suit, a red carnation in his breast pocket. Beside him sat Jean-Pierre and two other lifetime judges of the Federation. Dorian sat in the second row, in a custom black suit of absolute purity. Richard Lang was also there, in a back corner seat, shoulders hunched, looking like a man who had wandered into the wrong room. He had an invitation tonight only because Serafina had left his name on the guest list. She wanted him to watch. Madeleine Ashford was not present. Reports said mental stress had triggered a recurrence of an old condition. Her family had sent her to Switzerland for treatment. Lucas Ashford was in domestic custody, cooperating with judicial investigators. His passport had been confiscated. Vivian Lang's name had been permanently removed from every list maintained by the Fédération de la Haute Couture. At 8 o'clock sharp, every light in the Grand Palais went out. In the darkness, a sound emerged, faint and impossibly delicate, like wind passing through bamboo, like a needle piercing silk. It was the sound of 990 silver needles piercing fabric simultaneously, amplified, remixed, composed into a 10-second overture. A single spotlight blazed to life at the center of the runway. Serafina Lang stood inside it. She was not wearing a gown. She wore a white tailor's work coat, sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing the black lambskin brace on her right wrist. The coat was still flecked with stray colored threads and a smudge of tailor's chalk. She looked as if she had just risen from her work table and hadn't had time to change. No makeup, hair tied back carelessly. She stood there, on the most elite haute couture runway in the world, before an audience of the industry's most powerful figures and a global live stream audience in the tens of millions. 3 years ago, I presented a collection here. It was called Nirvana. Her voice was soft, as if recounting a story from long ago. It was the first time I had ever stood on the stage of Paris Haute Couture Week under the name Thorn. After the show, I planned to reveal my true identity to the world. But 3 days after that show ended, my half-sister stole my work. My fiancé staged a cutting table accident that destroyed my right hand. My biological father announced in the newspapers that he was severing all ties with me. My name was erased from place after place. Another person's name was put where mine had been. The room was utterly silent. That year, I thought my career was over. But I did not die. Serafina raised her right hand and slowly, deliberately, untied the black lambskin brace. The sound of it falling to the runway was soft, but through the sound system, it filled the entire Grand Palais. On the back of her right hand was a brutal old scar, running from the web of her thumb to her wrist, like a dried-up riverbed. She flexed her fingers, slowly. Every joint moved. Every joint was under control. I spent 3 years restoring this hand, and restoring every design that was stolen from me. The 9 gowns I am about to show you. Each one corresponds to a piece of original work that was plagiarized. From the crane in clouds to 4 seasons. From orchid in the empty valley to moonlit lotus pond. I will tell you, piece by piece, the true story behind each of them. She turned and walked to the work table at the far end of the runway. On it sat an old treadle sewing machine, the same model she used in her alley alterations shop. She sat down on the work stool and faced the machine, just as she had every night for the past 3 years. There are no models tonight. No one else can walk this show for me. The lights shifted. The first gown was lowered onto the runway by a mechanical arm. Pale yellow silk organza, the hand-embroidered crane at the collar poised for flight. The crane in clouds. Serafina put on this dress she had spent 7 months making, and she walked the entire length of the runway alone, in the spotlight. When she turned at the end, the tulle skirt billowed out in the light like a crane spreading its wings in morning mist. The live stream comments were overwhelmed by 2 words, repeated endlessly. It's her. Second gown. Orchid in the empty valley. Third. Moonlit lotus pond. Fourth. Eastern fence. Fifth. Fragrance in darkness. Every piece had a version that had been plagiarized by Vivian. As each gown was shown, the giant screen simultaneously displayed the original sketches, fabric procurement records, footage of the creative process, and side-by-side comparisons with the plagiarized versions. The international buyers in the audience stared at the split-screen comparisons. Their expressions shifted from shock to anger, and from anger to a heavy, grieving silence. The 6th, 7th, and 8th gowns were entirely new creations, representing the new life that had grown from the ruins. They were titled Ember, Sprout, and Branch. From ash to germination to spreading branches, they formed a complete sequence of resurrection. When the 9th gown descended, a collective gasp swept the room. It was the final piece, titled Throne. It was not a wedding gown, not an evening gown in any traditional sense. It was a robe of black velvet, structurally ferocious in its complexity. The entire length of the robe was embroidered with briar roses in dark gold thread, climbing from hem to collar. Every thorn was sharp. Every rose bloomed with unapologetic ferocity. Across the back, in gold thread, a vast circular emblem, a crown woven from thorns. When Serafina put on this robe, the Grand Palais fell so silent you could hear a needle drop. She walked the runway. The black velvet trailed behind her in a long, dark wake. The briar embroidery flickered under the lights like a living tapestry of night. At the end of the runway, she turned. She faced the audience. She faced the cameras. She faced the world. I used to ask myself, when your work has been stolen, your name erased, your body broken, and your own family has driven the knife into your back, what do you have left? Silence. Eventually, I found the answer. She lifted her head. On the screen behind her, the image froze, a surveillance still from 3 years ago, her kneeling beneath the collapsed cutting table, her right hand a mess of blood. I have 2 hands, 1 mind, and bones that cannot be shattered. That's enough. This throne is dedicated to my mother. The best thing she ever left me was not the Subai brand. It was not the studio. It was teaching me that briars can bloom. And if they can't bloom, that's fine too. Grow thorns instead. A crown of thorns is still a crown. She curved her lips. The smile was faint and light, yet it split the silence of the Grand Palais like a blade of light. My name is Serafina Lang. I am Thorn. I don't need anyone to crown me. The entire room rose. The applause crashed like rolling thunder beneath the glass dome, and it went on for 5 full minutes. Sebastian Shin stood gripping his cane, eyes red, applauding with everything he had. Dorian Ashford stood in the second row. He didn't clap. He didn't cheer. He simply watched the woman in the thorn-woven robe, and in his eyes churned a depth of feeling he himself did not yet recognize. Underscore. After the curtain calls, Serafina returned backstage. She took off the throne robe and hung it carefully on a padded hanger. She put her work coat back on, tied the brace back on her wrist. The woman in the mirror, compared to 3 years ago, had a few more lines at the corners of her eyes, the scar on the back of her hand, and something in her gaze that words could not name. Her phone vibrated in her bag. Jasper had sent an update. Just received notification from domestic authorities. Lucas Ashford has been formally arrested on charges of intentional infliction of bodily harm, copyright infringement, and commercial fraud. Vivian Lang has been formally indicted on charges of copyright infringement. Richard Lang has been summoned on charges of perjury and abetting. Madeleine Ashford has been detained by Interpol in Switzerland. Extradition proceedings are underway. She read every word. Those names. The final accounting of those crimes. She had waited 3 years for this. She had thought, when she saw this message, that she would cry, or laugh, or do something wild and unrestrained. But she simply sat there, holding her phone, looking at the tired and unyielding woman in the mirror. Then she smiled. The corners of her mouth curved slowly upward into something gentle, something real. The first time in 3 years she had smiled at herself like this. The door behind her opened softly. In the mirror, she saw Dorian enter. Tuxedo immaculate. A document in his hand. Your certificate as a lifetime member of the Fédération de la Haute Couture. Sebastian Shun had the Federation president expedite the signature. He said it had to be in your hands tonight. Serafina took the certificate and opened it. The gilded letters gleamed under the lights. She was silent for a long moment, then closed it gently and set it on the vanity. Dorian, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. The first time you came to my alterations shop, was that really an accident? Dorian looked at her. He was silent for a very long time. Then, suddenly, he smiled. Not the polite, calibrated smile he wore in public, but a real one, loose and rueful. The Ashford Group Asia-Pacific headquarters is in Lujiazui. Your alterations shop is on the complete opposite side of the city. No one takes a Stephen Leong bespoke suit to a back-alley alterations shop, unless that's exactly where they intended to go. 3 years ago, Paris Haute Couture Week. Finale slot. I was in the audience for your Nirvana collection. After the show, I went backstage to find you, to meet you, but you had already left. Later, when I heard what happened, I sent people to search for you. For a long time. They couldn't find you. He paused. His voice roughened, just slightly. 3 years later, my special assistant Jasper was doing background research for an accessible luxury investment project. He discovered that the controlling shareholder of Stellar Capital had been transferring assets from overseas back into the country. The capital flows all pointed toward a small alterations shop on the verge of bankruptcy. He looked up the name, Serafina's Alterations. Stellar Capital. Serafina. When those two names were sitting next to each other, I knew. Serafina stood before him in that plain white work coat. She looked nothing like the radiant Thorn who had stunned Paris 3 years ago. But the sharpness in her eyes had not dulled by a single degree. The tensile strength in her bones had not weakened by a fraction. So you weren't there for the alterations. Of course I wasn't there for the alterations. Dorian stepped closer, looking down at her. I was there looking for someone. The woman who electrified the entire fashion world at the finale 3 years ago. The woman everyone had written off as finished, who dragged herself out of the rubble and rebuilt an empire. The woman who spent 3 years in a back-alley shop, needle and thread, seam by seam, sending her enemies to prison one by one. Serafina, you don't need anyone to crown you. But I hope there can be at least one person who stands beside you, who walks the rest of this road with you. The backstage area was very quiet. From the distance came the fading noise of the dispersing crowd, people chattering in French about the 9 gowns they had just witnessed. But in this small dressing room, time seemed to have stopped. Serafina looked up at Dorian, at the deep, unwavering tenderness in his eyes. She stepped forward and straightened the lapel pin on his tuxedo. The pin was the Ashford family crest, a design of briars and laurel intertwined. This crest of yours, she said. It actually matches my throne quite well. Dorian glanced down at the pin, now properly aligned. The smile in his eyes spread, slow and warm. Briars and laurel. A perfect match. Underscore. Serafina changed out of her work coat and sat on the stone steps outside the Grand Palais in the simplest black t-shirt and jeans. Behind her, the aftermath of the show. Before her, the Paris night, street lamps glittering. Her phone screen lit up. A voice message from Maggie Zhang. She pressed play. Maggie's booming voice exploded from the speaker, half sobbing, half laughing, raw with emotion. Serafina, I watched the live stream. Your show. That robe. I don't know anything about haute couture, but when I saw you walk out in that dress covered in thorns, I just started crying. Your Annie Wong cried too. The whole alley was watching. Do you hear me? Everyone was clapping for you. In the background, a chaos of cheers and applause. Someone was shouting, "That's our Serafina." Pride of the old alley. Serafina held the phone. Her eyes finally reddened. It was the heat that rises in the body when you are being held, truly, deeply held, by one person, by a group of people, by an alley, by a city, in the most unadorned way possible. She typed back, "Maggie, I'm coming home tomorrow. Wipe down the shop sign for me. It's dusty." Maggie instantly replied with 3 thumbs-up emojis. Dorian emerged from behind her and handed her a cup of hot tea. It was black tea, brewed strong, in a thermos. The temperature was perfect. She took a sip. It was Maggie's recipe, red dates and goji berries. When had this man gotten the formula from Maggie? What time is your flight tomorrow? 3 in the afternoon. There's a lot waiting when I get back. Lucas's trial is about to open. I have to give a victim impact statement. The sue by asset recovery lawsuit is moving forward. And Professor Chow's retirement benefits reinstatement petition. One thing at a time. Dorian sat down beside her. The stone steps were cold. He didn't seem to care. I'll be there. They sat together on the steps of the Grand Palais, The early morning Paris behind them, the wreckage of an old world they had overturned together in front of them. The road ahead was still long, but the darkest part of the night had passed. Under Half a month later. Home. Lucas Ashford's trial opened at the City Intermediate Court. Given the multiple charges and the extraordinary level of public attention, the proceedings were broadcast live in their entirety. The gallery was packed. Serafina sat in the victim impact seat. She was not wearing the brace. The scar that ran from the web of her thumb to her wrist was exposed to every gaze in the room, a silent piece of testimony. Lucas stood in the defendant's dock. His head was shaved. He wore the orange vest of a detention center. His face was gray and hollow. He looked at least a decade older. His gaze swept the gallery and stopped on Serafina for a single moment. The look in that moment was impossibly tangled. Hatred, regret, disbelief, and buried so deep he might not have recognized it himself, a thread of guilt. Serafina met his gaze without expression. Then she looked away. The trial proceeded to the victim impact statement. Serafina stood. Her voice was quiet, but every syllable was clear. 3 years ago, on the day I was pinned under that cutting table, you crouched in front of me. You stepped on my hand, and you said, "Serafina, you've disappointed me. How could you be so sloppy about something like plagiarism?" At the time, I thought you were the person I hated most in the world. Later, I realized that wasn't true. The most hateful thing about you isn't that you're evil. It's that you're evil with such absolute self-righteousness. You stepped on my hand and accused me of plagiarism in that gentle voice of yours, as if I deserved every bit of it. That's why you're not worth my hatred. Your Honor, I have no further statement. I respect whatever judgment this court renders. She sat back down. She did not look at Lucas again. Lucas lowered his head. His hands gripped the rail of the dock. His shoulders were shaking, but no one could tell if it was rage or fear or the first dawning awareness of what he had truly lost. The court delivered its verdict. Lucas Ashford, intentional infliction of bodily harm, copyright infringement, commercial fraud. Combined sentence, 12 years imprisonment, 3 years deprivation of political rights, fines totaling 20 million yuan. Ashford Group, for significant violations in the sue by brand acquisition, was ordered to pay penalties and full compensation for Serafina Lang's copyright losses, total damages exceeding 120 million yuan. Vivian Lang's case was tried separately. Given the massive volume of plagiarized work and the aggravating factors of evidence fabrication and obstruction of justice, she was sentenced to 3 years, suspended for 4. Though she would avoid actual prison time, her designer credentials were permanently revoked. There was no place left for her in this industry. Richard Lang, for perjury and abetting, received 1 year, suspended for 2. On the day of sentencing, he stood in the dock with hair gone completely white, back hunched, looking like a shell drained of all its substance. As he walked out of the courthouse, he saw Serafina's back in the distance on the steps. His mouth opened, as if to call her name. No sound came. Serafina did not turn around. Madeleine Ashford's extradition proceedings continued. After her detention in Switzerland, she had attempted to apply for bail on health grounds. It was denied. Interpol had completed the evidence handover. She was expected to be extradited within 3 months and would face charges as the principal conspirator in the intentional harm case. According to sources, she spent many nights sleepless in the Swiss detention facility. The hand that turned prayer beads shook more and more. The new string of beads she had acquired never made a sound. A month later, on a morning full of sunlight, the old alley woke to the scent of locust blossoms. The tiny white petals had blanketed the cobblestones. The air was sweet. The sign above the third shop front had been replaced. Still hand-lettered, but no longer the crooked left-handed characters. It was written in a graceful, flowing hand and signed with Serafina's name. The shop itself had been renovated. The long vacant space next door had been acquired and opened up to create a small gallery. On the walls hung pieces she had made over the years, from the restored vintage qipao to the latest ready-to-wear samples. But the cutting table was still the same old cutting table. The sewing machine was still the same squeaky brother model. The tool she had grown used to, she couldn't bear to replace. Maggie Zhang came in carrying a bowl of freshly made wontons, muttering, "First pot of the day. Eat while it's hot." She set it on the cutting table and headed back to her dry cleaning shop. At the door, she turned and added, "Come over for dinner tonight. Your Auntie Wong brought her homemade pickled cabbage. I'm braising pork ribs." Serafina made a sound of acknowledgement, picked up her spoon, and took a bite of the wontons. The broth was scalding. The umami made her squint. The door pushed open. Franklin Chow walked in, a roll of blueprints under his arm. He looked immeasurably better than he had months ago, his back straighter, his face fuller. "That series you mentioned last time, I did a preliminary layout plan. Fabric utilization can be improved by another 3 percentage points. Come take a look." Serafina put down her spoon and bent over the blueprints. They discussed the layout for over 10 minutes, moving from fabric efficiency to cutting sequences, from cutting sequences to the silhouette direction for next spring's collection. "Girl, your patterns now are even sharper than 3 years ago." Chow removed his glasses and shook his head with something like wonder. "Your mother would be so proud if she could see you." Serafina smiled, but said nothing. She just rolled the blueprints carefully and tucked them into a dedicated storage tube. After Chow left, she sat back down at the cutting table and resumed her work, a client's chi-pao, needing a set of hand-sewn frog buttons. She picked up her finest needle, a size 12, threaded it in a single motion. Her right hand was as steady as if it had never been injured. Around 10, her phone rang. A message from Dorian. "I'll pick you up at 3. The Ashford Group Asia-Pacific Design Center officially opens today. You're the chief designer." She typed back one word. "Okay." She put down the phone and kept sewing. The stitches were fine and precise, each one sharp and clean. Outside the window, the sun was perfect. The locust blossoms were drifting down. From the alley came the cries of a scrap collector and the laughter of a neighbor's child. Maggie was yelling from next door, "Whose cat stole my fish again?" The scent of life was thick as freshly simmered bone broth, hot, real, and solid. Serafina finished the last stitch and snipped the thread. She hung the chi-pao on a hanger, stepped back to examine it, and nodded once in satisfaction. Then she stood and walked into the gallery space, stopping before a familiar garment. The black and silver left closing chi-pao gown. The camellia at the collar and the moonstone still refracted their quiet arcs of light. Beside it hung the throne, the black velvet robe, the briars climbing dense and fierce, the crown of thorns across the back blazing gold in the sun. 2 garments on the same wall, 2 volumes of the same story. Her fingers brushed lightly over the sleeve of the throne. Then she turned and walked to the mirror. The woman in the reflection wore a simple white blouse and dark trousers. The scar on the back of her right hand was plainly visible. No makeup, hair tied back carelessly. She looked like any other woman living and working in an old alley. But the light in her eyes was different now. It was the gaze of someone who had been through the darkest night, the deepest wound, the coldest human cruelty, and had still chosen to stand. Sharp, but no longer brittle. Gentle, but no longer weak. Serafina straightened her collar in the mirror. Then she picked up her car keys from the table. Dorian's car would be waiting at the mouth of the alley. She pushed open the door and walked out into the falling locust blossoms and the sunlight.